I never liked talking about that night. People think that when you live in isolation, you start making things up, that the silence drives you mad, that you start hearing the wind and thinking it's someone calling your name. But I know what I saw, and more than that, I know what I heard. It was the kind of sound that shouldn't exist so far from any house. Children's voices, two of them, laughing softly, as if they were afraid of waking someone up. I remember the feeling first, not the sound, not the image, the feeling that something was watching me, that the air had changed density, as if I had stepped into a place where I shouldn't be. And then came the laughter, a light, almost beautiful laugh, until you realize there's no one there. They called me by name. I swear I heard it. The first time, I thought it was the wind. The second, my entire body froze. The third, it came from behind a tree, just a few feet away. I didn't run. I should have run. The next day, I found small tracks in the mud, like the bare feet of children, but too long, too thin. And a laugh has been stuck in my head ever since. If you ever hear two children's voices calling your name in the dark, run. The next morning was cold in a different way. It wasn't the air, it was me. Something was stuck in my body, a kind of emptiness that coffee couldn't warm. I got up before the sun, as always. I made coffee on the wood stove, left the radio on to break the silence, but the local station wasn't coming in right. There was just that hiss, that low noise of clipped voices. Still, I left it on. It's better to hear noise than to hear nothing. The cabin smelled of burnt wood and gun oil. Outside, the wind passed through the pines, making a sound that almost seemed like a conversation. I tried not to think about the night before. I convinced myself it was coyotes. Coyotes make strange sounds. Sometimes it even sounds like laughter. But when I remembered the way they call my name, something inside me seized up. There was no way it was a coyote. I grabbed the shotgun, checked the traps, and went down the trail. The ground was still damp, the mud hard with frost. I walked slowly, listening to every step, and realized that everything was too quiet. No birds, no insects, just the wind. When I reached the third trap, something made me stop. It was open, not broken, open, as if someone had taken it apart with their hands. The mud around it had small tracks like children's feet, but long, thin, wrong. I knelt to look closer and smelled it. It was sweet, but rotten, a smell that clung to my nose and stayed. I didn't stay there long. I kept moving, trying not to look back. On the way back, I heard a whistle, low, short, coming from the same direction as the laughter the night before. I stopped. I gripped the gun tightly. Nothing, just the wind. At night, the wind picked up. The wood of the cabin creaked, as if someone were running a hand along the walls. I lit the lantern. I sat and listened. Every creak sounded like a footstep. Around 2 in the morning, I heard something dragging outside, slowly, almost silently, and then silence. Then the whistle came again, closer, and this time it sounded like it was coming from 2 directions at once. On the third day, something changed. I didn't notice it right away. It's always like that. Strange things don't show up screaming. They just move what you thought you knew. In the morning, I found 2 new footprints near the shed. Small, bare, deep in the wet mud. The rain had stopped before dawn, so those tracks were recent. I thought someone might have passed by. Hunters, maybe, or a lost child, though no one lived within a 10-mile radius. Still, I left food on the porch just in case. Pieces of bread, some jerky. The next morning, it was all still there, except the plate was turned upside down, and there was a long scratch across it, as if a fingernail had been dragged over it. It was at that point I started to feel truly watched. During the day, nothing happened, but at night, the sound returned. Not the laughter, not yet. Just the sound of light footsteps stopping near the window and then moving away. On the third night, I heard the fence snap. I went to the door with the shotgun in my hand. The lantern swayed in the wind, and for a second I thought I saw movement near the trees. 2 small silhouettes. Still, they didn't move. They just watched me. I blinked, and they were gone. When dawn broke, I went to get a closer look. The ground was covered in tracks, the same small footprints circling the house, crossing over each other. And near the wall, something made me stop. One of my traps, the one I had left closed on the porch, was hanging, suspended by a wire, the metal twisted as if someone had been trying to learn how to dismantle it. I stood there staring at it, my stomach churning. It smelled of iron and wet earth. I tried to convince myself again. I thought of raccoons, coyotes, anything, but raccoons don't know how to hang traps, and they don't leave human footprints. At night, the whistling returned, this time in response. One would whistle, the other would repeat it, identically. One sound answering the other as if they were playing a game. I stayed in the dark, sitting, holding the gun. The sound came from far away and then closer. When it reached the window, I stopped breathing. The whistling stopped too, as if it had heard me. I stayed there, motionless, time standing still. And then came the breathing, low, on the other side of the glass. Only one thing crossed my mind at that moment. They knew I was awake. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of the bed with the lantern out, the shotgun between my knees and my ear tuned to every noise outside. The wind had stopped. No movement in the trees, just the sound of my heart pounding in my throat. When the clock struck nearly 3, I heard the first sound, a sharp crack near the north wall. Then another, lighter, as if something was scratching the wood. I remained motionless. And then came the thing I've never forgotten, breathing. On the other side of the wall, slow, heavy, like someone trying to breathe through a stuffy nose. The sound came in and out so close it felt like warm air was passing through the cracks in the wood. I stood up, slowly. Every step I took made the floorboards groan, and the sound on the other side would stop, as if listening to me. When I stood still, it would return, got close to the window. I didn't want to look right away. I just stood there, my body pressed against the frame, listening. And then came a touch, faint, a light scratching on the glass like a child's fingernail trying to feel what's on the other side. A second later, more breathing. Now there were 2. I can't explain it, but you could feel the difference between them. One was shorter, nervous. The other, deep, slow. They took turns one after the other, as if they were listening to the rhythm of my own breathing to imitate it. I tried to light the lantern, but before the flame could rise, I heard the sound of running footsteps outside, light, uneven, in circles. A sound of bare feet slapping against the wet earth. I opened the door. The cold air hit my face. Nothing, just the forest. But you could smell it. A sweet and warm scent, half metallic, half rotten. The same smell from the mud tracks, only stronger now, as if the wind carried it directly from someone's skin. I stood there, trying to see. The lantern trembled in my hand, and then, at the edge of the light, I saw movement. Something low, humanoid, crawling on all fours, crossing between the trees. I didn't look directly. My body wouldn't let me. But I made out 2 small forms side by side, moving fast, as if sharing the same step. They stopped for a moment. They turned their heads in my direction. And the sound they made, it wasn't laughter or a whistle. It was my own voice, repeating a word I didn't even remember. Saying my name. After that, the darkness swallowed everything. The next morning, I didn't clearly remember what I had done after that. I should have gone back inside, locked the door, and waited for the sun. But from the dirt on my boots, I think I stayed outside for a long time. The ground was covered in new tracks, small, deep, scattered in a circle, as if someone had been walking around the house all night. I grabbed a shovel and started erasing the footprints one by one. I don't know why. Maybe to try and convince myself they hadn't been there. But as I did it, I noticed something. Each track came from a different point in the forest, and they all ended at my door. I went back inside, closed the windows and pushed a cabinet against the door. I tried to eat something, but the food seemed to have a different taste, as if the air had contaminated everything. The radio was still hissing. No station would come in, just that constant deep noise that sometimes sounded like voices. Around noon, I heard something hit the back wall. 3 sharp, spaced-out knocks, as if someone were testing the wood. I went over with the gun. The sound stopped. I waited. Nothing. The rest of the day passed slowly. The sun seemed unwilling to set, but the light faded slowly, and the silence grew with it. Before it got dark, I made a decision. I was leaving. I couldn't wait around for something I didn't understand anymore. I would go to the road, about 2 miles away, and sleep in the truck. I gathered a few things, ammo, water, a flashlight, and waited for night to fall completely, so I could leave without being seen. But when I opened the door, I realized my mistake. The air outside was warm, heavy, like trapped breath, and the sweet smell returned, strong, clinging to my throat. I stood there, feeling the wind on my face. I heard dry leaves moving slowly on the opposite side of the trail. 2 steps, then silence. I turned on the flashlight. Nothing. I turned it off again. I kept listening. What came next was worse than any sound. It was the silence between the 2 of them, as if one was waiting for the other to move, as if they were communicating without sound, just by breathing. I went back inside and locked the door. For the first time, I felt that they didn't just want to play, they wanted me to decide, run or stay. And when I understood that, I realized something else. The decision wasn't mine, it was theirs. After that night, I stopped thinking of them as something out there. It was more than that. They knew I was there. And worse, they knew how I lived. In the following days, I started noticing small details that only someone who had been watching me for a long time could know. The shed door, for example. I always left the padlock hanging, unlocked. One day, I found it locked. The key, which I kept on a hook inside the kitchen, disappeared for a few hours. Then it reappeared on the table, wet. In the morning, when I went out to get firewood, I'd see small stones piled on the path, always 2. One larger, one smaller, side by side. At first I thought it was a coincidence. Then I realized they were always pointing toward the cabin. The radio kept hissing, but now, in the middle of the noise, there were pauses. And in those pauses, the sound that came was the same as the whistling, only lower, more drawn out, as if they were mimicking the frequency of my breaths. I started talking to myself to ward off the fear. I talked about mundane things. That is, the wet wood, the weather, the noise from the fence. But after a while I realized that when I stopped talking, the radio's hissing stopped too. And when I started talking again, it came back, as if it were listening. On the 4th night, I heard something inside the house, a short, light footstep coming from the kitchen. It wasn't wind or wood, it was a footstep. I stood still, pressed against the wall, breathing as quietly as I could. I could hear the floorboards creaking slowly, heading toward the bedroom. But when the lantern light hit the hallway, there was no one there. On the floor, right in the middle of the passage, was a toy. A small, broken wooden horse. I didn't own that. Never had. I picked up the horse, looked at it closely. It smelled of damp earth and iron. Underneath, there was a thin carving, as if someone had scratched my name. After that, I started to understand. They weren't trying to get in, they were trying to bring me out. Every sound, every track, every smell. It all pulled me a little closer to the forest. At dawn, I dreamed of the whistling. When I woke up, the sound was still there, coming from the window. And in the middle of it, a small, thin, almost affectionate voice whispered what sounded like a question. "Do you remember us?" I didn't answer. But the radio answered for me, repeating, word for word, in my own voice. In the following days, the forest became different. The wind didn't sound the same. It was as if the air had learned to move around. The house, without coming in. The footprints returned. Sharper now, you could see where they began, always a few feet from the edge of the trees, and where they stopped suddenly, as if whoever was walking simply vanished. I followed one of them carefully. The mud was fresh, and the smell of earth was mixed with something sweet, almost familiar. I walked about 50 yards in, and then I noticed there were two trails, side by side, but in some stretches, one stepped inside the other, as if they were a single body. I went back before dark. I closed everything up. I tried to pray, but I couldn't remember the words. The radio turned on by itself in the middle of the night, hissing loudly like a scream. When I turned it off, I heard what sounded like laughter, two of them. The wood of the south wall began to crack 3 times, then silence. And then a new sound, something dragging a nail or what seemed like a nail from top to bottom, scratching the plank. Slowly, I grabbed the gun. I went to the window. Nothing. Just the reflection of the lantern. When I turned around, I realized the door was open. I hadn't heard it open. The wind didn't do that. I ran and threw the bolt, trembling. The handle turned once, from the inside, by itself. I stood there staring at it, my heart pounding in my ear. Then it stopped. The rest of the night was a game of patience. Every noise was followed by another, as if they were testing me. They knew what made me stay quiet, what made me look, what made me react. I was part of something, and that something was learning. In the morning, I found something new on the porch. 2 small handprints made of dry mud, side by side. Between them, a line was drawn in the dirt, written with a finger. "Don't close." I erased it with my foot. But in the afternoon, when I went to get firewood, the same words were on the shed door, scratched with a stone. And on the radio, the hiss turned into a whisper. You couldn't understand what they were saying, only that there were 2 voices speaking low, almost laughing. The sweet smell returned as night fell, stronger than ever. It came from the wind, from the wood, from my clothes, as if it were already inside me. It was then I realized I couldn't wait for morning anymore. The siege was complete. They knew I was going to try to escape, and they seemed ready to let me try. That night, the air felt heavier than usual. It wasn't wind, it was density, as if the whole world had stopped moving and was waiting for something to happen. I didn't light the lantern. I stayed in the dark, sitting in the kitchen chair with the shotgun on my lap. The radio was off, but the hissing still came. I don't know from where. The ceiling, maybe, or the wall. Shortly after midnight, I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from the back of the house. A rhythmic sound, 2 short steps, a pause, 2 steps again, as if 2 people were walking side by side. The sound got closer until it stopped at the kitchen wall. The wood creaked with the weight of something leaning against it, and then silence. You could hear the wind passing through the cracks, and with it, breathing. 2 of them. The first was short, breathless. The second long, almost calm. Together they sounded like one. My whole body locked up. I couldn't get up, or aim, or speak. I just listened. The sound of a nail scraping returned. It started lightly, like a test, then harder. The wood vibrated and the sound moved from one corner of the wall to the other, as if they were walking inside it. Suddenly something fell from the ceiling, a handful of dry earth mixed with hair. I looked up and saw the hole in the ceiling, small, dark, and from inside it, the sound that came wasn't a whistle or a voice. It was crying. A child's cry, muffled, as if the sound were trying to escape through the wrong throat. I just listened to it, unable to move a muscle. The crying grew louder until it turned into laughter. 2 laughs mixed together, alternating, imitating each other. I grabbed the shotgun and fired at the ceiling. The sound stopped instantly. Only the echo was trapped inside the house, and the smell of gunpowder mixed with the other. That sweet, rotten smell. The silence after the shot was worse than the sound. The breathing returned, closer. Now it was coming from the door. The latch began to turn, slowly, making the same noise I heard in the early mornings. I turned the key, locked everything, but the movement continued. The metal vibrated, trying to open, and then the sound changed. Something dragged itself across the wood of the door and stopped right in the center, at the height of my face. You could feel the heat from the other side. A small, trembling voice whispered my name. Then another, identical, repeated it. The two of them at the same time, with the same tone, the same breath, the same rhythm, as if both were breathing inside of me. That voice saying my name hung in the air for a long time. I couldn't tell if it was still happening or if it was just continuing inside my head. I remained still, the gun pointed at the door. No sound but my own breathing, and even that seemed too loud. The lantern swayed, casting shadows that moved like people. The latch stopped turning. For a moment I thought it was over, but then came the sound that still wakes me up in the middle of the night. Something began to tap lightly on the wood, with fingertips, not in a threatening rhythm, but in a patient one. One tap, pause, another tap, then two together, as if they were imitating a heartbeat. I listened until I realized the rhythm was the same as mine. When I tried to breathe more slowly, the taps slowed down. When the fear rose, they sped up. They knew. I thought about escaping through the back, but the window was covered with the boards I had nailed myself. The floor creaked beneath me. Any movement would give me away. So I did what seemed most stupid, but it was the only way. I sat on the floor and closed my eyes. I held my breath for as long as I could. I tried to die for a few seconds so they would believe it. For a moment, it worked. The taps slowed until they stopped completely. Total silence, a kind of silence that has weight, that compresses you. After a while, I heard the sound of bare feet moving away from the door. Slowly, the sound grew more distant, heading toward the trees. I waited a few minutes, maybe hours, I don't know. When my body began to tremble, I opened my eyes. The lantern's light was dim, almost out. I grabbed the gun and went to the nearest window. The moon cast a faint light on the yard. Everything seemed empty, but right at the edge of the woods, I saw something. Two small figures standing side by side, eyes lowered, heads slightly tilted like someone listening. I couldn't see a face or a shape, but the way they moved, it was too human, almost natural. And then one of them raised a hand, slowly, and pointed directly at me. They stayed like that for a time I can't measure. Then they simply turned and went back into the forest. No sound. I stood there, motionless, with the gun pointed at nothing, my whole body sweating cold. And it was only then that I realized the breathing I was hearing was still coming from inside the house, behind me. It took me a while to turn around. My body wouldn't obey, but something inside me knew that if I didn't look, it would stay there, breathing behind me, inside my space, inside my air. When I turned, I saw nothing. Just the dark hallway, the trembling lantern, but the sound was still there. Slow, deep breathing, the kind you feel before you hear. I took a step forward. The breathing stopped. I took another. It returned, a little closer. That's when I understood. They didn't move like we do. They used our movement to move. Every time I walked, they walked with me. Every pause I made was the space they needed to get closer. I stood motionless, trying to think, and that's when I heard the most subtle sound of all, the sound of a voice, not clear, not whole, a murmur that seemed to come from inside the wall, repeating what I was thinking, not what I was saying. First came a word, then another. My own words returned with a delay, with a childlike breath between them. Don't look. Don't breathe. Don't. I was trapped between the urge to run and the fear of making a noise. It was then I understood the worst part. They didn't want to kill me. They wanted to imitate me, to learn. The sounds they made, the steps, even the way the air moved when I breathed. Everything was mirrored, rehearsed. They were practicing, maybe to replace, maybe to remember. I never found out. I looked around and noticed something I hadn't seen before. The house was full of small traces, handprints on the windows, tiny slivers of fingernails stuck in the wood, strands of hair on the floor. Human things. Too many to not be mine. I touched my own face and felt something cold, damp. In the darkness, I recognized the same sweet smell from outside, now coming from my skin. They weren't surrounding me anymore, they were inside me, or maybe I was inside them. The radio turned on again, by itself. No hiss, no noise, just my voice, clean, repeating a sentence I never spoke. We're still here. The sound kept playing, softly, almost like a lullaby, and for the first time, I didn't feel fear. I just understood that there was no longer any difference between us. When the sun began to rise, I was ready to leave. I hadn't slept. I hadn't eaten. I spent the whole night sitting, waiting for the first trace of light to cross the window. I grabbed the shotgun, the flashlight, and what was left of the ammunition. I opened the door slowly, gun in hand, and felt the cold wind hit my face. The sweet smell was still there, but fainter, mixed with that of burnt wood. The forest looked different in the morning light, shallower, as if the ground had moved a little during the night. The trees were in different places, not by much, just enough for you to notice something had changed. I walked down the trail, fast, trying not to look to the sides. With every step, I felt something following me, but not at a distance, in rhythm. The sound of my own boots had an echo, and that echo came a little later, a little lighter. 2 steps behind, I tried to ignore it. I looked at the ground. The footprints were there, but not just mine. There were others, smaller, thin, accompanying each. 1, always 2. I kept walking. The noise from the radio started again, even with no radio nearby. A hiss that came from the air, as if the wind carried the sound. Sometimes I heard words, sometimes my own name. After a while, I reached the truck. The doors were open. I was sure I had left them locked. Inside, the driver's seat was covered in dry mud, and right in the center, 2 small footprints facing forward, as if someone had been sitting there waiting for me. I threw everything out, got in and turned the key. The engine coughed, took a while to catch. When it started, the dashboard radio lit up on its own. No station, no voice, just breathing. I drove fast as I could. The road seemed to stretch on, as if the path would never end. I looked in the rearview mirror. Nothing. But the reflection in the window showed 2 figures sitting in the back seat, motionless. I blinked, and they were gone. Or maybe they were never there. I kept driving until the tank ran dry. When I stopped, the sun was already high. Absolute silence. I got out of the truck and saw the ground covered in footprints, all just like mine, hundreds of them, going in opposite directions. The wind blew, and with it, a low, almost imperceptible sound. 2 voices whispering like someone saying goodbye. "Don't close your eyes, Jack." That was the last thing I heard before the engine died for good. It's been 17 years. Sometimes I think I've made up half of what happened, but when the wind changes direction, when the smell of wet earth returns, I remember. The body remembers. The truck is still there, covered in dust, a few miles from the old road. The county folks found it years later. They said it looked like it had been abandoned for a long time. In the back seat, there were small marks made of mud, 2 of them, side by side. I never went back to that region. Today, I live in a trailer closer to the city, but sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and feel the same. Forest air, heavy, warm, sweet, as if someone is breathing along with me. Nobody believes me. They say it's trauma, loneliness, or all in my head. But every now and then, 2 voices appear on the radio, never together. One calls, the other waits, and sometimes I answer. Without meaning to, just to see if they still remember my name. If you ever hear 2 children's voices calling your name in the dark, don't answer. If this story gave you chills, leave a like, comment what you would do in my place, and subscribe to the channel to hear the next account. There are some things we tell to try to forget, but some stories never go away.